The hybrid. Yeah. The hybrid. Yeah. The hybrid. Yeah. The hybrid.
All right, everybody, welcome back to The Hybrid. I'm Erik Gunderson, here as always with Shawn Collins, and today we're kicking off episode 13. Look at us go. This is our 2026 forecast for cannabis, what we're calling our bets and our tripwires. Before I get into it, I want to say this is not a hot takes episode, even though that's going to disappoint Shawn. This is not us trying to predict headlines, shitting on politicians, or chasing whatever story is trending. We're just trying to establish a baseline. If you're a regulator, policymaker, operator, advocate, or just someone who's following the space closely, these are the assumptions we think are reasonable to carry into 2026 and the actions that could disrupt them. The structure of today's conversation is fairly simple. We're going to talk through 5 bets. These are things that we believe will shape cannabis policy over the next year. Obviously, no guarantees, but things we actually would make a bet on based off what we're seeing across states, agencies, and legislatures right now. Then we'll flip it and talk about 4 tripwires. These are the risks, the pressure points, the events and decisions that could sink those bets. Some are political, some are legal, some are budgetary, and some could be self-inflicted. And why is this important? Well, we're clearly at a pivotal point for cannabis policy. Most state programs are no longer new. They're maturing. Decisions don't get easier, they simply change. And at the same time, they're still faced with real federal uncertainty around scheduling, enforcement posture, and what Congress actually does, if anything at all. Budgets seem to be tighter than they've been in years, and pressures are hitting regulators head on. Agencies are being asked to do more with less, while public expectations keep going up. So the question for 2026 isn't just where cannabis policy is going, but what holds it back, what breaks, and what may surprise everyone. That's what we're going to be digging into today. So with that, we can jump in. But obviously first, Shawn, how are you?
Hey, man.
What's going on?
I did the wrong homework. I've got nothing but hot takes and shit talking. So
I know.
I'm just going to wing this one. This is going to be a doozy, but yeah, man, it's good to see you. Happy New Year. I think we're able to still say that. Excited for this one. You mentioned it's not hot takes and also like, what's the purpose? I mean, let's be real. I think everybody starts a new year with a bit of a New Year's resolution, but also like, what do I want? What's going to happen this year? We all make predictions. The interesting part's going to be kind of coming back and seeing how much of them were like way off and not even close to being right, and or how much are really like not quite hot takes, but I mean, I think especially in this world, cannabis, like so many times I'm sure you and I have been like, I did not see that coming. But where did that come from? Or a few times I've been like, it can't possibly get any worse than this. And then it's like, just, I'm testing fate. So yeah, it's good to see you. Welcome back. Little curious too, like episode 13, what could go wrong? That's, you know, bad luck, isn't it? We should probably just skip right to 14.
I mean, aside from the bad luck, look at us, man. We made it 13. We made it
Right?
13 episodes.
Yeah.
Still here.
Well, the FCC
Incredible.
can't touch us. So that's probably why.
Hell yeah.
We can say some pretty foul things here, but we won't
Now,
because we're adults.
And I think you're right too about the look back. We'll definitely score this. We'll certainly pat ourselves on the back if and when these things actually do come true. And
Lots of victory laps, yeah.
yeah, a lot more victory laps, hopefully, than us admitting that we were wrong. But also, we'll get into some of these, and I'll have to say, like, bet might be a strong word if we're actually talking about putting our own money down.
Yeah.
I don't, but I think they're worth the conversation and worth kind of talking through, and we'll see what happens because 2026 it's going to be wild regardless.
I'm pretty conservative when it comes to betting too. So these are like, for the bettors out there, like these are like plus 100s. Like these are not like, you're not getting rich off of these by any means. Like these are definitely like soft parlays. So
I was going to say, unless you parlay all 9 of them together, which is something that I would do.
That's just irresponsible. That's reckless.
Well, It's
That's a
entertaining.
donation. Yeah, exactly.
That's how I watch my Patriots game. Just the 10-leg parlay. Drake May throws for 1,000 yards. Anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right. So we can hop into it really quick here. And Shawn, I think you're gonna lead us into the first one. And this one kind of seems like a no-brainer because we've started to see the signs of it even heading into 2026, but worth talking through as well. But our first bet is that the federal posture around cannabis, there's going to be a shift even without major reform, like descheduling, complete legalization. Um, and I know I said that you were going to kick this one off, but certainly talk about the announcement, the executive order, the process of rescheduling, all the stuff that's happening around hemp. It's already started. So
Yeah, but I think that's what makes this a little bit of a bet, is the context around what the bet actually is. And for me, it's that it's not going to happen fast, if it happens at all, despite that announcement and that news and that uh, celebration, and or you talked about victory laps. The bet is ultimately that I do think the federal posture changes, but I don't think it changes the way people think it will or is in the process of changing. So, and I realize it's a lot of ways to use the word change in a sentence, but ultimately the prediction that I have is that uh, this thing gets mired in bureaucracy, and it doesn't happen fast. And what President Trump did was essentially, if rescheduling was sitting in a red light, he just tripped the light to green and said, go, with a bit of urgency, right? Like, he, told the attorney general, get it done, that sort of thing. And it does seem to me, at least, that the administration kind of heeds that directive of go do it, and they go do it. But my fear is the politics give way to process. And so where there's a will, there's a way, sure, but you're still moving the Titanic in a direction that needs a lot of space to move. So if they file in the Federal Register to reschedule cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, Sam has already indicated, the Sensible or Kevin Sabbath's group, has already indicated they're going to hire, they have hired Bill Barr, they're going to sue, and process gets attacked. And I think what sucks about that is that it sort of lives up to expectations that a lot of voters and citizens have, which is they can't get out of their own way. These guys are just like, they told us they're going to legalize, now they're not, like false promises. And I think the bet that I would make, therefore, is that happens, not that you're getting 280E tax relief in calendar year 2026. So
I couldn't agree more. I mean, when you're talking about, I just have flashbacks talking about, all right, we've set our trajectory on where we want to go with this. And now it's not really a policy debate. It's about process, which is the worst, the absolute worst.
it's also
About
where we kind of live, by the way, but that's fine. Yeah.
I know. I mean, I lived through it with rule changes, updating rules, like just being challenged on procedural items.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's part of the reason why people hate bureaucracy so much. There's just so many. I mean, I know we're talking about bets, but there's so many tripwires in the process that I just have nightmares about it. But I think you're right. I don't think we see anything in the Federal Register until maybe next year if we can. I mean, if you remember, like, we didn't start a brand new process from the beginning. They're restarting where the Biden administration had left off, and they've already gone through some of these steps. I think they were in the middle of the actual hearing itself, which has been appealed. So the first thing they have to do is try to figure out how to back out of that and restart this bad boy. But I think in general, if you're talking about like what are the bets that there's momentum at the federal level without full legalization, I think it's apparent. It's already happened, right? The softening in the posture, the way the federal government views or approaches cannabis. It started with the last administration. It's continuing with this administration. And I think symbolism matters. And I think that is enough to get that snowball rolling downhill. So regardless of the process, in those groups and organizations that are going to try to trip it up everywhere on process, like it's eventually going to land at the bottom of the hill. So,
in what condition though? I think that's the other thing to
yeah,
think through is like once this bird does land, like is she flyable? Like what is she seaworthy? Because I think that's the other concern here is, and keep in mind that you mentioned the Biden process. Every single player in that, or every single character in that sitcom is changed. New attorney general, new DEA administrator, new judge, administrative judge. That the judge literally retired during this exercise. And so I think that all of them need to get acquainted with both process and substance, but also with each other. And keep in mind too, AG Pam Bondi, uh, Florida Pam Bondi is no fan of cannabis necessarily. I think that's a factor here of just how motivated they might be. Same thing with Terry Cole at DEA. Like the bureaucrats that are being charged with carrying this out are kind of doing it like through a bit of a forced smile, like a yes sir, off we go, and like well, if we get sued, we get sued. Like I'll die on that hill, but I'm gonna die nonetheless. My fear is that happens, and the other thing I wrote about this in, not sure if folks know, but I read a newsletter every day. So no free shout outs, but shout out to the newsletter. But one of the things I wrote about was the benefit from a prohibition standpoint is the politics of cannabis are popular. You don't have to win on the politics to challenge this thing in court. And so you get to be like, it's not about whether we should legalize. That's not the question. Is this the right process to go through? It's challenging, did you do a sufficient public hearing, public comment period? Is challenging the actual language of the order. Like those things become, talking about tripwires again, but I think that's where the argument in the debate lies, not so much in the, should we do this? And then also you got sitting outside of this Congress who had a half-hearted attempt to block rescheduling as part of, in some of their appropriations things. They just this week, I guess when this publishes or when this airs will be next week, but just last week, therefore, essentially reinstated the Rohrabacher Amendment, which protects medical programs, but took out the stuff to block rescheduling. To me, that's political hedging. Like if the Trump administration wants to go forward with rescheduling, go nuts. If it's successful, Republicans did it. Yay. If it's not, well, it's a lame duck president. So we don't really, there's no blast radius onto us. So I guess our first bet, therefore, is pretty pessimistic. So is there good news in our bets?
Well, the good news is that it's happening. I guess for all of the reasons why we as a group think this is the right move to make as a country. Um, but I think at this point, nobody should be surprised why we're pessimistic and what exactly we're talking about. So it's going to be one that like unfolds throughout the year that we'll be able to track. And I think we'll have, to your point, ample time to track it and give updates because it's not going anywhere fast.
We should know. We should check in on these bets throughout the year and keep a tally, because I think this will be one. Obviously, all eyes are on this thing too. Like it's not going to be a secret by any means. And I think you also saw around the president during that rescheduling announcement, plenty of familiar faces that are going to keep pushing this boulder either up the hill and maybe at some point down the hill. We'll see.
Okay. So what's the next bet that we got? I think bet number 2, we're going with state regulators and state programs move on from build out, like the implementation, getting a program up and running, to system optimization, which I think
Man, that sounds boring.
It does. It's not boring. I think it's different. But look, some of these, honestly, some of this has already happened. We've had some programs up and running for a decade, but we do have a big chunk of programs in the middle that came in really that second or third, probably third or fourth wave of states that have gotten through those challenges and now have fully functioning programs. And they've entered this new point of their life cycle, right? Like all of these programs go through it. You have a program and now you become an administrator. And really, I think they're doing a good job in 2026. I think it'll be more public. There'll be more of a concerted effort for people to kind of look inwards and optimize their programs. And optimization can mean a lot of things. I mean, you know that, like where are the inefficiencies? Where can we be doing better? And that runs the scale all the way from like, we need new systems. Like we're operating off of old, antiquated systems that are going to better serve our operators and better serve the state and this agency, all the way to we need to crack open these rules and make some major adjustments to address these things that we keep hearing from whatever stakeholder group it may be. It's not even like our industry stakeholders or our legal operators. It could be law enforcement. It could be public health. It could be the legislature themselves. It could be whatever it may be. But I really think there's going to be a concerted effort, and through different organizations like CANRA, the conversation is going to start going around what are the best practices to take it to the next level, because it behooves them to make sure that we're operating the best programs possible, especially with the shift at the federal level. We don't need there to be a tripwire. Um, and I think states are really taking a good, long, hard look at their programs, understanding where the weak links in the regulatory chain are and starting to address them in new, creative, novel ways. So that's me getting on my soapbox for our former colleagues and the hard work that they're doing. But it's not that they weren't doing it before, but I think it's going to become more obvious, more out in the open and transparent that this is the direction that a lot of these agencies are headed. Is let's start to improve.
And I think so. Building off of that, sort of taking the baton here, the message or sort of the bet, therefore, is ultimately that change is inevitable. Change is going to happen. Change is not a bad thing. It's not something to avoid. But I think if I'm in the industry or if I'm a regulator, there's almost a permission to your tone of like, that's a good thing. You should be doing it. And it's hygiene to some degree. But the other message to industry, to operators is that change is possible, and you can shape it, you can influence it, you can suggest it. But that there's a season to that thing, or, we're sort of hitting that stride of regulators are obviously sort of us peeling back the layer or the curtain for people to actually see what goes in behind the scenes. Is we put these rules in place, we then implement those rules. We discover things as we're implementing, like, oh, let's put a pin in that, let's come back to it, or let's fix that. We're sort of interpreting our own language. It's not a lack of interest in sort of going back and revisiting those rules sometimes. It's a lack of capacity. It's a lack of, knowing that process is an undertaking in and of itself. It's like, am I at a critical mass of changes where I can justify taking that process to like change a word here or there? And so I think what you're telling our listeners is ultimately that a lot of programs are now getting to that phase of their life cycle where It's like, all right, we can come back and do that house cleaning right now. We can go back. And I think your reference to CANRA is a really timely one and a good one. Is those early CANRA meetings for me, and I'm sure for you, were sort of diagnosing problems with each other and being like, you have a solution for this? It's like, I'm not yet, but I'm having the same problem as you, at least. And I would come back to my state and say like, so the good news is everybody's dealing with it. The bad news is that no one solved it. Now I'm sure those meetings, although you and I aren't in the room anymore, have now turned to here's how I solved. And so that information sharing is going to lead to those changes too. So, I mean, this is one of those bets where it's like, it might be a plus 100. It's going to be, but I think it's a good indication to both our former colleagues in the regulatory space that it's okay to make those changes. And also there's a humility to that too, which is like, that's good governing. That's a good example. And then to industry is, don't waste the opportunity. Like, now's your chance to engage your regulator in a meaningful, productive, positive way and say, I'm living, this is my experience. And I think you'll find that there's an open mind to, all right, let's tweak, let's tighten, let's improve. So,
yeah. And I also think there's something to be said about like when we went through it, there were 5 or 6 other states that went before us versus now the regulators that are coming in have, to your point, the luxury of having solutions, being able to be sourced from other state agencies, and the mindset of the regulators, and rightfully so, are, I don't want to say vastly different. They're different than the headspaces that we were in when we were the guinea pigs going through it for the first time. Like, all right, we need to hold lines. We need to be much more conservative. Once we understand where we are and what we have, then we can adjust. And they're kind of seeing this play out, being a little bit more flexible in the way that they approach it, because they certainly understand their first job is to protect public health and safety. But I think more and more are starting to understand, like, all right, this program that we're implementing from an economic standpoint, it doesn't really work. So what can we do to help make it a more competitive space? And you've heard me use the word competition or competitive probably 100 times on this podcast, but that's kind of more and more where their head's at. And I think one of the other things that I've preached for a really long time, and I think part of the optimization is, like, I think one of the most important aspects of any of these programs is bringing predictability. As an agency, you need to have structure and you need to bring as much predictability as possible, understanding there's always going to be a little bit of gray space there. And I think it's even more important now with all of the changes at the federal level. Like, people are looking to these state agencies and state legislatures that actually have the ability to get that stuff done. So part of the optimization is doing the best job possible to bring that predictability for those operators and those other stakeholders in the space to understand, as you put it, Shawn, what's a ball and what's a strike.
That's right.
So,
and there might be another wave of regulators assuming that role too, because in the lifespan of an agency, you and I have talked about this before as well. We've talked about it in our own instances, like the burnout risk and sort of that turnover risk is, what does the next phase of this agency look like? It might not be the same people in that were in that first phase. And so that predictability piece also respects that transitions happen and someone needs to walk into a structure that is functioning and operable, but also that has a future to it too. So I think keep in mind that that's also part of the just the life cycle of an agency for turnover.
All right, I think we pretty well covered that bet. I think you're probably right. Even a plus 100 might be a little bit generous there, but you know what? I'll take it. So the third bet, Shawn, you want to take this one?
Sure, if you want to tell me what it was.
Consolidation in the market accelerates quietly in increased licensed mobility.
Sure. So on this one, man, my bets are like really depressing. No one's going to be surprised to hear, or actually no one should be surprised to hear, that the reality in the market is like, you reference like this federal reform is like this bated breath of like, it's coming, it's happening. It's, you know, how many people have actually made literal bets on that of like, I just need to survive until rescheduling and then the capital markets open up and that's when I'm going to restructure all of my debt. That's when I'm going to go public. Like, I've got this windfall at the end of this tunnel and people are still looking for that light. But before that light actually appears or reveals itself, my business collapsed. And so what you're seeing in the market right now is a ton of receiverships. So a lot of that debt that was, signed 5-6 years ago is coming due at rates that the market can't support anymore, whether it be wholesale pricing on product, retail pricing, cratering. So like the volumes there, the consumer demand is still there. There's no doubt, but the margins on the business side, especially with 280E, are crippling. And what that's leading to is as the market saturates, it can't really consolidate in every jurisdiction because of market and license caps, those sorts of things. So that consolidation ends up becoming more of a like a retraction of the market that's going to now see people exit. The problem is that exit is actually a shuttering of doors, but also where does that debt go? So receiverships are obviously lining up, and these distressed assets are becoming sort of a market unto themselves. And so you're seeing what's left for parts, what's left for brands, what's left for equipment and all that sort of thing. So the selling off of those pieces means, for me, as I look at it as a policy mind, how quickly can I move that license? Or is that license itself, does that have value in a market that maybe has a license cap as far as an overall, market cap? Or, how can I turn that asset into something for my business portfolio? So I think when I say license mobility, it's sort of looking at the flow of licensure between and amongst the industry, and how can regulators, one, anticipate that and get ahead of it, and what rules are in place to sort of insulate that. But then also shenanigans are going to start to happen, right? It's going to be things like, I can come in and run that license, but I can't control it because of it. Like, so I think as regulators, that's the thing you just gotta keep your ear to the ground on and figure out, how does this issue of receivership, consolidation, et cetera, fit within my regulatory scheme, and what compliance risks are there? And again, that compliance risk is gonna be both on the regulatory side and the market side of the industry side. So the prediction, or sort of the bet, is that that issue at some point pops. And I think there's going to be a mountain of paperwork coming for somebody. And I'm predicting that this is the year that that ultimately like breaks the camel's back, so to speak.
Yeah, it's pushed to the front. More license transfers, more of the dreaded agreements.
That's right.
Uh, and I think too, I think part of the bet, and maybe I can put it into my part of the bet, as opposed to yours, but certainly the bet is being made that this is going to happen, but I think it's going to happen more quietly than you may think. I don't think
Okay.
there's going to be a dramatic event. But we already have evidence that supports this is beginning to happen. But I think the bet that we're making here is that it's kind of pushed the front, and it becomes a real talking, or I don't want to say talking point. That's the wrong word, but it becomes a real issue that people need to start figuring out how to address in the most appropriate way. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, I think maybe the way to think about it is, if you're in the conference circuit, expect panels on this, right? Like
Yeah, yeah,
that's,
yeah.
I think if I like, it's going to become a narrative that picks up. It's going to be the thing that people talk about at cocktail parties, or the cocktail hour brought to you by. Um, I think that's like the prediction is ultimately that that's going to consume a lot of time, energy, and those conversation. Like if you bump into someone at a conference, you only see them a couple times a year, you guys are going to talk about this. It's going to happen because it might be what you're seeing, what you're hearing, it might be your own experience, but there's some rumblings too that I think are not so subtle, right? Like you have some of the giant players are consolidating, right? Like you look at an Air, what happened with them in 2025, as far as at one point, not too long ago, they were like a really good bet. They were buying assets. They were growing quickly. Now they're being broken apart for pieces and parts. Ascend, same thing. Like there's these Curaleaf retreated from the West Coast. They're now sort of consolidating around the East Coast. And some of that is business strategy and hedging bets. And like, I'm not saying there's any, I don't know. It's not my place to really know as far as like how the asset is faring or assets are faring, but I'm reading tea leaves to the point where I suspect, yeah, it may not be like a pop per se, but I definitely think it's going to be, um, a cocktail party discussion topic, no doubt.
Okay, we can make that same bet then. And and two, so just more of the evidence. It shouldn't really be surprise to anybody. I think it's probably a fairly safe bet. I mean, it's been years now since that capital has dried up. So you have a lot of these smaller operators, medium-sized operators that realize that that's not flowing in to save them. So that I would imagine they're either A, looking for an exit, or B, looking for somebody to latch onto and partner with to help weather this storm, however long that goes. Cause obviously the bet they made is they'd be through it already. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, that's just
And this,
the lack of money there.
less so a bet, more so just sort of framing it too. Like this is not what makes this unique to cannabis is the structure as to caps, and like, and again, when I say caps, you have statewide caps as far as like competitive licensing, but you also have per entity caps, and states are different. The takeaway though is that that's the unique aspect to cannabis. A market growing at an exponential rate or pace, and then ultimately consolidating, is what happens in a capital market. I used to say, like, if you just legalized coffee, we would have coffee shops on every corner, and then the market will go to their favorite coffee shop, and the others will just either cease to exist or get gobbled up by that coffee shop. And that's where you get a Starbucks, Dunkin' Donuts, etc. But where cannabis is unique is that at some point someone said we should only have so many coffee shops. And again, that's, Eric's coffee shop should only have X amount of shops, or across all of Maine and Massachusetts, we should only have so many coffee shops. So that's the piece I think that is a cannabis unique element. The rest is just market forces. So
Good bet. I'll give it another plus 100.
you're going to lose your shirt on this bet. So that's fine. The house always wins.
All right, bet number 4. Tax policy becomes the central state level debate. What does that mean?
Kind of suck. These bets are like,
I know. And maybe we can kind of recap that and reflect back in preparation for this podcast and what we're going to be talking about.
We're hitting singles.
I didn't put
singles.
Yeah. So what do we mean by that? I mean, I think
and subscribe.
Yeah, I think I think a bet can be made in 2026 around states kind of lifting this up as a policy fight, a policy discussion, a policy debate within state capitals about how to handle this money. And I think we have it teed up to talk about as a tripwire kind of state budgets and where they're at right now. But like a lot of these states are looking for money. And so part of that debate is going to be how are we going to leverage the tax revenue from these cannabis programs, these vice industries, which always seem to be the first to get increased, versus our policy objectives of minimizing or reducing the illicit market and the other things that we're trying to do. And so I guess the bet really is like, we're going to see a lot more states having these conversations this year in their legislative sessions. We saw it last year we saw what happened, the ups and downs in California. We saw what happened and what continues to happen in Michigan. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see it from a lot more states. And I think generally speaking, you may have one or two now that I actually think about it that bring it down for policy reasons. But I think what we're talking about as far as the bet is the vast majority start sniffing around the idea of filling some of their budgetary holes with increasing. It could be the taxes. It could be licensing fees. It could be fines and enforcement. Like what? I mean, they will try to figure out every nook and cranny where they can squeeze an extra buck out of cannabis. Again, it's these vice programs. You always see it. We see it. I think in nearly every other, nearly every other state, nearly every state with tobacco, right? With maybe not alcohol as much, but that's
gaming,
the bet that
introducing gaming. No, I think that's and so I think it's a safe bet, frankly. But I think to your point, the bet is ultimately that not the taxes will go down. Because I think if you were to talk to the industry or even consumers for that matter, like this is normal such that what's the justification for a tax in the first place? Like why is there an excise tax on some of these products? Obviously revenue is the motivation most often. And back to your point about sort of the maturation of programs, when these programs are first put into place, there was an unknown expectation around impact. What is like, we need to mitigate some of these downside risks of cannabis. And those really, by and large, haven't proven true. And so the natural in a vacuum policy reaction would be to then remove that tax or reduce, right? Like it would be to, all right, this hasn't proven its case. Therefore, those funds are not necessary. We should therefore reduce it to zero or eliminate. As we know, politics does not live in a vacuum. Those funds just get diverted elsewhere and then become sort of structural programming. But if you're following state government at all these days, like you said, funds are tight. Some of that is a federal, a lack of some of those COVID era programs and funding. Some of it is certainly there's a new administration in the White House and some congressional starts and stops, et cetera. And so we're seeing this play out where budget constraints are driving policy choices. And I think the cannabis industry, unfortunately, still remains a pretty easy target for that. Because one, there's a huge misconception or lack of general awareness of this industry and the pressures that these businesses face.
Yes.
People just see sales are strong. Where, there was just a press release, it was yesterday, about, Massachusetts sales broke another record. Go talk to a retailer and like, how was your banner year? And it's like, I'm barely surviving. Like if I am, and I think that's the challenge, is the public expectation of the outside looking in is like, this is the industry at tap. These guys have money and it's cash and that sort of thing versus, again, the reality experience. So maybe the takeaway too for folks in this space is that, get to know your legislator, talk to them about your pressure points and because otherwise I think you are a very ripe target. Like you said, we saw it in California where it was proposed, it was actually enacted, and then had to get revisited. Michigan looking at 24% wholesale tax. It's definitely going to impact your bottom line, and it's also going to hit the consumer at some point. But then the other thing is looking at regional comparison, regional competitiveness. So there's going to be some different pressure points kind of coming into this, where what is your tax rate vis-a-vis your neighbor, and is it competitive, or are you sort of losing that customer base, that tourism dollar? And then alternatively, how can it fill some of your other budget void? But
Yeah.
if I'm industry, I'm definitely looking at that in a pessimistic way and saying I better get ahead of this, or join your trade groups, that sort of thing. Like, definitely don't be shy about introducing yourself into your political ecosystem.
I mean, that's really good advice for those
People
operators,
do pay me
especially.
sometimes for that advice, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, if I was a kid, I would just be handing you $100 bills. No, I think
Don't do that.
I don't need an invoice, Shawn. Don't worry.
Yeah,
Let me
that's
just
all right.
hand you wads of cash.
I think my accountant is a listener, so that's good.
Okay, good. Yeah. But I think the term that you use there is ripe target. And I think that's absolutely right. I mean, and part of this may stem from the fact, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this too, but I certainly know early on, it may be less so now. I haven't actually looked into the numbers to like confirm what I'm about to say, but I feel like it could be right.
Definitely
Like,
say that on a podcast then.
yeah, I feel like cannabis taxes, definitely early on, it could still be the case, underperform expectations. Early on, when people legalized cannabis, it was, we are going to build thousands of schools. And you're like, no, you're not. Like, how much does a school cost? All right, you might get a half of one. Or that might be an over exaggeration.
Fill your library.
Yeah, exactly. I think I would hope that people have learned from that and set realistic expectations on what type of revenue can be driven to a state through a cannabis program. But why I say ripe target is the right word is because when they're trying to like stabilize a budget or fill these gaps, I mean, you're not going to cut. People would go wild if you cut education. People would go wild if you increase income tax. I don't know what it would be, or property tax. Like, the cannabis industry is the path of least resistance, I guess, from a political standpoint, in order to start addressing some of these budgetary gaps. So that's kind of tying back to like, hey, these are steps that you should be taking. Talking to your legislature, forming a relationship, letting them know like the reality on the ground for you, your family, your business. I'm not going to say that it's going to be enough.
Sure, that's right.
Legislatures, appropriation committees are faced with making tough decisions all the time. And the reality of the situation is, it seems like for whatever reason right now, a lot of the states are in not a great position when it comes to their budgets, which is just a tough process in general.
You mentioned earlier, like the sort of the vice, the sin aspect of it makes it somewhat appealing. And I think the other thing to think about is political clout. The reason we don't often attack alcohol taxes is, do you want to challenge the alcohol lobby? So now you're going to have every liquor store in your office. You're going to have all the major manufacturers, the wholesalers, distributors, that sort of thing. And there's a political reality that is also very well ingrained into your political system, which is like, it's been around for 100 years. I think that's where cannabis can sometimes fall victim, is it's so new that they just don't know. And so those entrepreneurs, those leaders have not yet built those relationships where they can pick up the phone and call their senator or their rep and say like, this is a really bad idea. And also I would just pinpoint the bad idea is actually purely from like an objective evaluation standpoint. There's an economics model to run here, which is, at what point do you tax it such that it's a sort of a return, or like the sliding scale becomes where you actually lose money? Because one, I'm going to go over the border. So if I tax in Massachusetts to a point where it's encouraging me to go to Maine to buy my product, see ya. I'm going to make that choice with my wallet. And then similarly is that tax rate increases your medical enrollment in your state, whether it's tax free, or it just produces or appeals to the illicit market, which is still very much a reality in every state that's legalized. And so I flag that just as a sort of an economics model, which I'm no expert in outside of just the common sense aspect of, like, there's going to be a de minimis, if any, return on that increase, and you're going to pay a political price for it. It's also easy, like you said, to increase taxes on a product that is viewed as a sin or a vice versus I'm going to increase a tax on your property, or now you're going to get the senior citizens, that sort of thing. So, but yeah, just for context, I think the mass tax rate, just because it's fresh, was it was like 260 plus million on the entire year from an excise tax. So yeah.
What's Massachusetts' total budget? 20 billion?
I don't know, the like overall state budget.
Yeah,
it's probably close to 60 billion.
Yeah, see, there you go. That's my point.
So I'm like pushing like 50, 60 billion. Yeah, it's in that range. And like I remember having a conversation with a legislator who said, I deal in billions, not millions. And that's true, but it also it's a bit humbling when you're like, I've got an opportunity for you to get like $20 million in your state budget. And it's like, oh, that's cute. That's nice. That's a rounding error. So thanks.
That's right. All right.
More
So
bets.
let's go to, bet number 5. Shawn, I'll let you lead this one off, but our bet is, and I think we may be in different places within this bet, but making the same bet, that Congress changes the definition of hemp again.
Yep. So let's tee this one up. So if you have not been listening or paying attention, which is fine, happy holidays, welcome back. Congress changed the definition of hemp in their shutdown reopening package, the deal, the deal that reopened government not that long ago, just before Thanksgiving. And they changed the definition of hemp to a very narrow, very, very narrow, restrictive definition that is really put, and I'm not just going to say intoxicating hemp, but all hemp in a position of what does the future look like, crisis mode. And that definition is so restrictive that things like industrial hemp, health and wellness, and the intoxicating market are all reeling and figuring out what the future looks like. Why I therefore think that Congress revisits that bet is several reasons. One is, well, I'll start at my reason, which is they should. Number 2 is because the implications are so wide and they are so catastrophic in some instances for things like health and wellness, CBD. I've been reading like different news outlets, blogs, etc., where like veterinarians are concerned about pets being able to access CBD calming treats. Hemp farmers are saying, I'm not even going to plant the crop this spring because I've got no throughput. Like I've got no supply chain to put this into. And so those decisions are getting made now. The reason I think they're going to revisit it again, though, is because there's an opportunity to do that too. They implemented this with a year timeline. So I think it's November 12th of 2026 is when this new definition takes effect. And so if you put that into sort of an environment or into a box, there's a couple of things I see happening down the road. This is sort of the origin of this bet. President Trump reschedules or pushes, does not reschedule, but advances the rescheduling process through his executive order, saying to the AG, go do. Part of that buried in there was this pilot program through CMS for a full spectrum CBD for seniors, and really trying to test the efficacy of CBD. The problem is, by definition, right, currently that takes effect in November, what the hell is full spectrum CBD? And how does it get defined? And does it fall into that narrow definition where it's actually not legal? And so that's where I think that contradiction of Congress does this thing in November, the president does this thing in December. We now lead into 2026 with that collision, that conflict to say, you've got hemp farmers in one hand, you've got this CMS pilot program rolling out across the country in another hand. You've got a small but emerging, and I think emerging rapidly, intoxicating hemp industry. You've got veterinarians, you've got seniors, you've got veterans, all saying like, you just created a complete shit show, fix it. And that's why, so the basis of that bet is Congress does need to revisit that definition. why I think this is a bet and maybe even a bit of like a plus 300, plus 400 is because the bet is that Congress is going to do something.
Let's
And
not
if I
lose
were a
sight of
betting
that point.
man, and then let's advance the calendar a little bit. And I obviously want to get your take on this too, but advancing the calendar is, this is a November implementation, sure, but farmers plant in the spring, and also midterms are coming, and Congress doesn't do anything as they get closer to midterms because it's a political hot potato. Every vote you take is going to be your opponent's ad. So this is not a November thing. This is like a next 90 days thing, in my opinion.
That I would bet against that. But there you go.
I'm not, again, what I'm saying is 90-day thing, like it happens or it doesn't.
Got you. Okay.
So
That
I'm not saying
makes
it
more
happens
sense.
the next 90 days. I'm saying it happens or it doesn't.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have a lot to add here other than the fact that I think they're not within 90 days or not like having a strict deadline here, but I think the hemp definition does get revisited. I think it's extremely limited in scope to allowing for those health and wellness CBD products. I think there's the users of that, your seniors, your grandparents, your older aunt and uncles that use those products are much more sympathetic than the consumers of some of the intoxicating hemp products. And if I remember correctly, we talked about this the other day. There was some subtle language in the president's executive order around this stuff.
That's right.
Almost like a directive. So if and when something does happen, I think it's going to be so limited in scope to those items, where there's going to be a whole lot of panic that continues and uncertainty around this industry, and a lot of these other operators that fall outside of that very narrow scope. Um,
Yeah.
that's just my prediction. And again, now we're talking about now we're talking about the federal government, the current federal, like the Trump administration and Congress, like making bets on what they will and won't do are probably stupid bets. So I might should go like way better odds, way better than odds of plus 300 or 400. Otherwise, I wouldn't take the bet.
Well, and if you think about it, think about the politics of just rescheduling. That all the rumor mill plus the stories that have come out about that entire process are, you've got these Oval Office meetings with industry, with Secretary Kennedy, but the speaker's on the phone saying, don't do it. And like, so you're sort of getting the sense that this wasn't done as a conservative Republican movement. This was done sort of as a President Trump saying, I personally want to do this. And with the resistance is kind of coming from a couple different angles, one of which is the Republican Party sort of traditionally. Then you've got this libertarian wing that's saying, do it, should have been done, like sort of, no regulation or, less government, that sort of thing. So I think the politics are fascinating, but obviously if I'm an operator, especially in the intoxicating hemp space, I'm certainly watching this very closely. But to your point, that inside that executive order was a directive to the White House legislative staff to work with Congress to fix the issue. I would say on the spectrum of options, though, two things come to mind. One is Congress is good at delaying things. So that's always on the table, is like just kicking that date out for a while. The other thing to think about too, and this is where I think you and I have a lot of friends and former colleagues in this space, is states have built programs. And so talk about tax revenue, like states have built programs with taxes on these sorts of products. And it's also introduced and integrated the alcohol industry pretty significantly through their 3-tier system, both distribution and retail included. And so interesting constituencies, interesting, strange bedfellows. But I do think that there's a slate of options that Congress. So I guess for me to determine success, to cash this bet at some point, Congress has to affirmatively revisit that section of their shutdown bill and say either we're going to kick this date out to buy more time, or just they put in place a federal structure. That I think is a tall order, because now you're getting Congress to agree on stuff. The one thing I think they can do, though, is delay. So we'll see.
I mean, that's a good point that I didn't even think about. The old kick the can down the road, a go-to move by the federal government and many state
Yeah.
legislatures across your wonderful country. Yeah.
But I
And
think
to
the state program element is a layer that is underappreciated, which is there are state regulators not dealing just with marijuana policy, but also in an effort to solve the concerns of an intoxicating hemp market, have actually put in place a structure for it and devoted resources, but also collected a shitload of taxes too.
Yeah. And the last thing I'll say before we move on here is you said the political dynamics around this are fascinating. I couldn't agree more. I mean, especially since you're talking about a president who, I think if we learned anything, is motivated by money and is influenced by prominent business figures. Um, Meanwhile, you have some in Congress that are, you can tell this is a hard line for them. Like they are done being dicked around and bamboozled. And it's a real public health and safety thing. So how that plays out will be fascinating to watch for sure.
Yeah, like I said, strange bedfellows definitely, as an observer, fascinating. As a participant in some instances, pull your hair out, frustrating. So,
all right, Shawn. So we've covered our 5 bets. And I think we agree that the line on those bets, the money return, has to be a little bit of variable for some of us, for us to make some of those bets. But now let's talk a little bit about some of the tripwires that are out there that could cause, when I say us, like the cannabis community, cannabis policy in general, to take a stumble or have a delay or possibly a setback. Um, and one of those, I think we both feel passionately about, and we'll have plenty to discuss here, is some type of testing crisis or lab scandal that maybe reframes the conversation around cannabis as a whole. But I'll let you start this one off.
yeah, so that's right. I think, and if you and I have learned anything through our work as regulators and subsequent work as folks either advising those regulators or those folks around them, is that every year, inevitably, something happens that we didn't see coming. That impacts a market, that impacts momentum, that sort of just trips everything up. So hence the tripwire. And I think the one of the single most effective but vulnerable areas of public confidence is the lab and testing regimes that sit within each legal market. And that's typically when folks go to a ballot box and either vote in favor of medical marijuana or vote in favor of adult use, that confidence of product quality, predictability, consistency is, again, it's a motivating factor. I would argue it is probably the predominant motivating factor, especially for folks who are otherwise agnostic to cannabis, like they're not advocates, they're not industry participants, that sort of thing. Is like, well, we should test it. And I think if that vulnerability becomes a reality, where it's, these most often are private businesses that are, they have customers. And so we've heard a lot about things like lab shopping and that sort of thing, potency inflation. But also it's an emerging science around cannabis testing. It is a very unsettled science in some instances as far as methodology and that sort of thing. So I think the environment is ripe for coming to a head at some point. Maybe the tripwire hot take to this is like the scandal aspect of it, because that obviously implies that someone is acting nefariously, or so there's some sort of conspiracy going on. There might, like, there's the scandal aspect, I think, is like someone's intentionally doing something. I would argue the tripwire is just the sort of the lack of controls and or a lack of methodology becomes a huge problem. The benefit is, I think there's really smart people in this industry that are working on it. There's really smart regulators that are setting standards. But we're kind of, it's back to the analogy of like flying the plane while we're trying to land it. We're building the plane while we're flying it, and the fire truck to the fire, that sort of thing, is very much still a reality in some areas of our regulatory scheme and structure. And I think a lab scandal and or a crisis of some sort of public health matter becomes a very easy excuse not to do other things. That's where Congress goes, oh, not so fast. See, we told you we weren't ready. That's where an administrative law judge that is, again, Kevin Sabat and Sam are challenging this, it becomes a very easy headline that's going to screw up your market. It's also going to support those repeal initiatives across the country, that sort of thing. So I think it's a very vulnerable, very real tripwire that could upset a lot of progress across the entire chessboard. So
I think tripwire is a much more appropriate place to have this conversation and prep for it. So the listeners know we were talking about having it as a bet that this would become an issue. And I said I wouldn't take that bet. I had placed that bet in 2023, in 2024, in 2025, and to my surprise, it just hasn't gotten to that point. And I think you're totally right. Like when I think about cannabis programs, testing continues to be the weakest regulatory link in the entire system. You also made the point that a lot of smart people are working on this, which they absolutely are. And some states are leading others on how they're approaching this and the resources they're investing to address it. But I always felt like it should be a bigger thing, because, I mean, consumer confidence, with the with potency inflation, deflation, like we know there is evidence that these are all happening. And that's speaking directly to the integrity of the program and the products that are being purchased. And I worry at some point, the tripwire being the tipping point where that consumer confidence starts to, I don't want to say go down, but people start to question it. And I don't know if they go back to the traditional methods of procuring cannabis or whatever it may be, but it's a real issue. And I think a lot of the times it's such a technical issue. And you said it's a new science, and there's still a lot of unknowns. There are no standards. States are left to figure out on their own. So a lot of this is like, all right, well, we need to focus on some of the other things that we can firmly get a grasp around, and show progress and wins. But I think tripwire is certainly the right bucket that it should be in. Will it happen this year? Will it happen? I think inevitably it is coming, and we're going to have to take a hard look at ourselves in the mirror, because we know, like, we're talking about potency inflation. When you're going to buy flour that's 35%, we all know that it's not 35%. One day when everybody wakes up and says, all right, this is actually like 20, what does that do to the group of consumers? Like, how does that impact them? How does that impact their decision making of where they're procuring their cannabis, how they're procuring it, what they're getting? Like, there could be a huge fluctuation in the way these programs, I don't want to say are operating, that's not right, but the way that consumers are interacting with them. So I felt strongly about this for a while. We've had this conversation, not on the podcast, multiple times, but.
And I think you're having that conversation with a variety of states that are all, like, back to the Canada discussion we had earlier about going to those meetings, being like, has anyone figured this out? And it's like the thing that we're just chipping away at, but there's no like comprehensive solution. But I think the reason this is so that, like, the science aspect of it is one thing, and then the plant itself is another thing that you're constantly chasing, which is like product variety, delivery methods. Like, it's not a vegetable. Like, this plant is not a vegetable. It's not like, but we have these conversations about things like pre-treatment, et cetera. And, I don't, if this has been treated in any way, you could have these labels, disclosures, that sort of thing. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, if people knew what happened to their vegetables before they went to the grocery store, like, but at the same time, the rescheduling conversation, I think, is where, like, this shit gets serious now. Like, if you get the FDA involved in product formulations, like, we're not screwing around with potency anymore. Like, we're not screwing around with, like, experimenting R&D for growing methods. And, like, you need to be able to produce that in a clean room environment that stands up to a testing protocol and a regime, but also like a consistent one. And I just think I see all this stuff coming to a head in some way. And I think the prediction of the tripwire, like, the reason this could have been a bet would have been like, something's going to happen. I bet that something's going to happen. The reason I think this is more appropriate as a tripwire is, if something happens, all of our bets, like, need to be revisited, because it halts any policy momentum and is the perfectly convenient excuse for someone to say, I can't do it. I'm not a yes on that vote, or like, I need to increase taxes. Like, it's going to become an evergreen excuse for why I either need to do something or not do something. But I would just say it disrupts, like it basically flips your chessboard over, and undermines all the progress that you and I made in our respective states, that our colleagues are making across the country, that folks are making in the federal government, that advocates are making across the country. Like it pulls the rug out from all of that.
Yeah. And I will add, because I don't want to sound like a pessimist on it, like setting up testing machines in these state programs is absolutely 100% the right thing to do. I always would want to pull my hair out for typically industry advocates that say, oh, the system's not perfect, we shouldn't have to test, or we shouldn't have to test for X, Y, and Z, which is just like crazy town to say, well, if it's not perfect, we shouldn't be doing it in the first place. I always hated that. I always hated that argument, but there are people that are working on it. But I mean, and it's not just like some of the more flashy, like, oh, potency inflation or even deflation when we're talking about hemp products or lab shopping, but it's also like when I say the weakest chain in the regulatory chain, it's also like sampling practices. Like it goes down to the
Exactly what I
integrity
was
of the
just thinking.
sample.
Yep.
It's the integrity of the sample itself. Like we know manipulation is happening there too. It's just it's something that I agree with you. If it does come to light, could be a major tripwire in the progress and advancement of cannabis, I don't know, being normalized or moving to Schedule 3 or descheduled altogether in the future. Um, but luckily, like I said, there are states that are going to serve as a model for other states that are maybe still getting their programs up and running, have higher priorities. I mean, um, but yeah, hopeful that we can get there, um, because it is an issue, and I hope it's not a tripwire. Certainly, obviously, I don't think we hope any of these become tripwires, but they do need to be discussed.
Yeah, I think this just we're identifying risk more than anything else, but I think we're identifying it from a place of experience, and also I think trying to assess threats. Right, like that is one that is all encompassing, and also I think there's been enough rumbling. It's like is is that volcano going to erupt or not? And I think it sounds like you've been betting on it. You've got up from
Yeah,
the seat at the casino, so I'll take your seat and say,
there you go.
I'll put all my money in. I'm all in
I,
on something going wrong.
yeah, I hope the machine hits for you, bud.
Yeah, thanks, appreciate it. I hope it hits
Yeah,
for all of us. Yeah.
yeah. All right. So tripwire number 2, and this is kind of like a cheat code because we did talk about this as far as one of our predictions for 2026 being that the conversation around cannabis taxes and revenue generated by these cannabis programs become a debate at state capitals across the country, at least the ones that have cannabis programs. But the tripwire is uh, state budget shortfalls. And if our prediction is right, they start having these conversations. They do start increasing the taxes, the fees on these cannabis programs. What is the ultimate outcome? What does that mean for cannabis programs? Where do we end? How does that mess with the dynamics of, say, medical programs, adult use programs, illicit markets? It could be a step backwards. I don't want to say it's doomsday, like we'd be doomed to fail if and when that happens, but it certainly could be a tripwire if we're talking about risks as we mature with some of these programs.
Yeah, I think that's right. And the we did kind of touch on it in the budget tax issue, but I think the reality is that the temptation is going to come from that budget shortfall. And then ultimately, I think the program integrity, you're seeing agencies now as they mature. I'm not sure if this was your experience in Maine, but in Mass, when I started, I was able to go to my legislature and say, I need this much money to stand this program up. I have to invest in this technology. I have to invest in this equipment. I have to build something. And so we always had that kind of trajectory that was like, how much more do you need? Or like, what do you need? And so we always had that financial support. But I always predicted to our staff, like, that's a 5-year window for me. At some point, they say, like, you're structural. This is what you cost now. And so you become sort of yes, you're funded in the budget, but at some point it's like you're getting close to that fiscal year and you're like, ugh, like, hiring freeze, or like, so you're starting to see these mature agencies now hit that level of maturity, that level of bureaucracy too. And so I would say the budget issue is both a statewide temptation to dip into the cannabis pocket, but also a regulator side structural bureaucracy, like reality of, and, and you and I've talked about like the technology systems as they age, need to be upgraded. That's a capital thing. We leased a lot of vehicles. That's a capital thing. Like that, all that stuff is coming, like rent's coming due. And I think some of these agencies are going to experience that too. And if that happens, that means things like policy doesn't get advanced or implemented. New license types don't emerge. And so I think a lot of risk is, I see the budget issues being like a global thing, but I think the more macro you can get, anyway, I think the more you can zoom in, I should say, it also becomes a very real impact for bureaucracy and your regulators that are either your colleagues or regulating you.
And that's right. And you take it a step further. Why are we even having this conversation? And what are the outcomes of some of these risks if they were to be tripwires? And I think you're right. And to your point, if you zoom in, I mean, we talked about what are the down the road policy implications of these programs, like the higher costs push consumers back to the illicit market. That one could be a reality, but even more so when you're talking about like on the human level, even if it's a governor's budget or the legislature's decision to do these things, that's going to, at the end of the day, sour in some way, shape, or form the relationship between operators and the regulators themselves. That tension that can be high already just because of the dynamics of the relationship, regulator and regulatee, can be increased, which causes all kinds of tough scenarios. And then also like the idea of filling these budgetary gaps, these what I would consider in some cases like a short-term revenue grab, it could potentially create certainly near-term, short-term, but also longer-term compliance issues for those regulators and those agencies and divisions within those agencies that they're going to have to deal with and keep an eye on. What are the results? How has this changed our operator behavior? That again threatens the integrity of the program that we're trying to administer in the most responsible way possible. So, all right. So, tripwire number 3. This one is a no-brainer. It's going to happen. It has happened. It's a very broad tripwire or category of tripwire, and that category is litigation.
I think we're done with the category. Honestly, I think it's like you said, it is absolutely inevitable. It is inevitable at the local, state, and federal levels. It is inevitable at the civil level, B2B. Litigation is not unique to cannabis by any means. Like businesses sue each other and businesses sue government all the time. I just think as you're trying to move policy fast, it is the one thing that it is like quicksand. And the reason it's a tripwire is because someone's bound to step in it. Again, you see states in their progress just get completely halted. And then they pivot. They either defend the litigation or they settle the litigation. They move on. But the tripwire is if you think anything's going to move fast, litigation is the stop sign. Litigation is the red light. Litigation is that quicksand. So I would just say budget for it from a time, energy, and cost standpoint, and then move on.
I'm starting to kick myself. We should have put this in our bets category. That would have been easy money. It's such a broad, like, of course it's going to happen.
They wouldn't give you the odds. They're just
you're going to lose your money.
Yeah. Like you can, the bet would be no litigation.
Exactly. With a high return.
Yeah. Vegas would probably wouldn't even take that bet and be like, what are you, dumb? Like actually they would take the money because you're dumb. So
yeah. But I think the conversation and the happenings and the gears turning at the federal level open up a new conversation for what type of litigation, how it happens, why it's happening. But I think because it's such a broad bucket, like nothing has changed at the state level. And there's still going to be litigation around Commerce Clause issues, residency issues, social equity programs, criteria. licensing caps, all these things. This is just an everyday reality for regulators and cannabis agencies that are doing the day-to-day to move things forward, unfortunately. But I think it's more the new conversations at the higher levels, how that could be a tripwire for the progress that we've seen get kicked off at the end of last year into this year and onward. So it's kind of a cheat code. Like that one's gonna happen.
Maybe the way to like the segue over to bet, for instance, though, is like the type of litigation. Because I think the traditional litigation is like I said, budget for it, presume it's going to happen. If it doesn't happen, like sweet relief. But if it does, like you're at least prepared. I think you might start to see some new styles, though, right? Like products liability could be an interesting dynamic of as this industry matures, as these products become licensed, so like brands are licensing their IP, like the products liability question of like, God forbid someone gets sick on some of this stuff or seriously ill, and they start to pull that liability chain. Where does it end? And so that might be a new. It's emerging. It's going to be so again, the bet aspect could be this type of litigation. I think the tripwire is litigation's inevitable, and those damn lawyers, man. Lawyers.
Couldn't agree more. All right, that's actually a nice segue into the fourth and final tripwire that we have, talking about liabilities, but tripwire could be a public health or safety flashpoint. An isolated event that just makes a ton of news or something at a larger scale, which obviously hopefully doesn't happen for a number of different reasons. More so, you don't want to see any harm come on any of your fellow human beings. But I think it's more the way that I'm thinking about it and framing it is there's this public health or safety event that happens, and the narrative starts to shift around what's working and what's not with cannabis in general. When does this experiment become a failure in the minds of the general public and the court of public opinion? That's kind of what I'm talking about here. And I don't know, I would imagine you would agree with that. Like that would be a tripwire for the things that a lot of people on multiple different levels are working on.
And the prohibitionists are hard at work trying to find those events.
Yeah.
Like they're not going to be shy about emergency room visits. They're not going to be shy about calls to poison control. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, but like this scromiting phenomenon of like scream vomiting that's happening. The reason those stories are getting placed is because people are placing them. And so keep that in mind too, that the public health crisis that I remember being asked in an interview at one point, like, how do you handle a crisis? And if I'm not mistaken, my answer, paraphrasing, was essentially first determine if it is in fact a crisis. Like how serious is this? Like, is this real? Is this live? Like, is this a panic mode? Like, break glass in case of emergency, or is this sort of a manufactured thing? Like, do we overreact to this and create a crisis inadvertently? And so I think the way you described it is hopefully helpful for our listeners, which is like what we're saying in this tripwire is that the issue itself could be the tripwire. The reaction to the issue could be the tripwire. The government reaction versus the consumer and or market reaction. So there's a lot of the public health issue, the public health pillar of cannabis legalization it's one of those load-bearing walls, though. If you remove it or if you risk it, the whole structure, I think, is therefore vulnerable. And my fear in that is that we had situations prior to COVID, we had E-Valley, and it put the legal market under a microscope. The issue was actually the illicit market, but we had to prove a negative. We had to prove that it was not our legal market and that our legal market remained safe. But the stories were cannabis vapes are getting people sick. Cannabis vapes sourced from legal sources. What the hell's a legal source? Legally, a friend could be my legal source because you can gift marijuana. Or I bought it, it looks legit, therefore it's legal. And so those risks, I think, are real. And the tripwire is that government doesn't react fast enough or overreacts and turns it into a crisis. And that is the pressure, by the way, facing your regulators. Every day when they read the news or they get an alert or They take a phone call from poison control saying, I've had 100% increase in phone calls. From what to what? From like 2 to 4? Or from 100 to 200? Like the volume matters too. So I would just say, this is an evergreen tripwire, just like litigation is, because it is always a risk to your market. I would also say though that my peace of mind comes from, by and large, I know these regulators and I know how seriously they take that load-bearing wall of public health. So,
yeah. And I think you're exactly right when you say, like, what is the reaction to it? And like, are we going to implement policies in a reactionary way versus like evidence-based adjustments, really sitting back to understand what's happening? But when you're talking about a public health event, it can be tragic and reactions can be rooted in emotion and they're totally real. And that all factors into like, what do we do next? But I will say, and agree with you on the fact that you have a lot of like dedicated public servants who have been doing this for a very long time since Colorado started. Like they all know and are hyper focused on their number one priority is to make sure that these programs are, I don't want to say safe, but safe as possible. And they're looking out for the public's health and safety and basically everything they're doing and every decision they make. So
in the process, it matters too. One of the things that I used to say to our staff in Mass was, I'm not always afraid of the cannabis getting someone sick. There's a lot of other ingredients that get infused into some of these products. The process by which they're created can sometimes have a public health risk or danger to it. And so the supply chain itself is and that's true of, you have product recalls on things like romaine lettuce all the time. And so I keep that in mind of like packaging and where you're sourcing your packaging, things like vape hardware. There's a lot of sort of fault lines or pressure points in the supply chain that I'm mindful of. And the last point I'll make on this too is that sort of back to the public health philosophy of regulators. That was the thing where like we were not screwing around. So things like there's tools at a regulator's disposal around product quarantine, recall, etc. Just keeping that in mind that, I think the system is built with a public health tool belt. And so confidence is that regulators will pull that ripcord if they have to. And it should be a hair trigger sometimes. And I guess maybe I said the last point was the last point, but that again is another excuse for people to not do things. Is something, if there's an adverse public health event, well, maybe we don't go so fast on rescheduling now. Like it has the ability to undermine. And then I guess we related to that too. One of the things we talked about was the program evolution and optimization. Some of that was through the lens of some of these rules need to be relaxed or repealed altogether. The fastest way to tighten that is a public health issue. You will sort of like a whiplash reaction of your rules will get stricter before they get more relaxed. If something like this, a public health crisis or adverse event appears. So just keep that in mind too, that rules can go, you can tighten a wrench and you can loosen a wrench. So you can't tighten a wrench. I'm sorry. You can tighten a bolt.
There you go.
With a wrench.
Unless you have an adjustable wrench, then I guess you could say you're tightening it.
My daughter's fond of saying lately, lefty loosey, righty tighty. So
hell yeah.
Teach them young.
All right. So we've covered 5 bets. We've covered 4 tripwires and kind of a look ahead for 2026. I gotta need to stop saying to kinda. How about we just put a bow on it and go through. Shawn, first, what's one of the bets that we covered that you're least confident in and why?
Ooh.
And I can lead because this one's a no-brainer for me.
All right. Yeah, let's hear it. Because I'll give you a chance to think of what my bets are.
Oh, I lost you there. Are you being attacked by a vicious canine?
She's about 35 pounds.
Jesus.
And yeah, vicious, yes, but canine's generous. So
right.
Yes, it must be in someone's walking by the door.
So the one bet that I'm least confident in would be that Congress adjusts adjusts in any way, shape, or form the definition of hemp. And while I still think that
your confidence in me is so just
likely, it's more my lack of confidence in Congress doing anything substantial, I guess, just because of I guess the world is burning
these are
right
capable,
now. And
smart, powerful public officials
all right,
that are doing, they're public servants.
You're that 1% of every poll about Congress. Are you satisfied or dissatisfied? There's like 1%. They're doing a great job. Now we know they're calling Shawn Collins. So that would be my answer. The one that I'm least confident in is there's any meaningful change around the definition of hemp again, and the board is kind of set, and people are going to have to react to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think on that one, I would say time will tell, right? Like, I think the ability of Congress to do something is certainly a reason to cast some doubt or have some doubt. But I mean, I think for me, that license migration issue is probably the bet that I just see it. I see it organically happening. I kind of predicted it while I was still a regulator, that at some point you're going to see fewer new license applications and the market's really going to trade amongst itself. I think in those mature markets, and this is where like the bet, depending on your perspective, may come true or not. I think the combination of debt that is coming due, market forces not having advanced as fast or as aggressively as folks had either expected or hoped, and then that market saturation all coming together at once, I think it's just creating an environment that you're going to see more and more receiverships, more and more distressed assets. And then the other thing I'll just layer into this is that at some point, some businesses are just really shitty businesses, right? Like if I were to open up a facility or some sort of business that I had no expertise in, and I just thought this is a cash cow, it's going to be so awesome, I probably won't do that well, but I would need either someone to blame, which is going to be like, well, the goddamn rules are just too onerous, I got to get out of this thing, or the reality is I close my doors. Like, how many businesses start and close in a year? Cannabis lives under such a microscope that there's always got to be a reason why. And I think we're very quick to point elsewhere and say it's a lack of banking access. I can't get a loan. But at some point, like, if you get into this business and weren't aware of 280E, like, you did really poor business planning. And so that environment, I think, is why that bet is, it's also kind of a not even plus 100, it's probably even money. Like, it's not that risky. Like, the market's going to be tumultuous. Yeah. Okay.
And then
Nostradamus over here.
Yeah. And then what tripwire, which we covered the four of them, which one do you think is the most overblown?
Litigation. As far as like overblown, like, yeah.
Overblown. Well, no, I think you and I are thinking about it differently. I'm thinking of overblown as like, it's really not a tripwire, or there's a minimal chance that it actually becomes a tripwire. And maybe, I guess it could be litigation as where, like, we know it's going to happen, but functioning as a tripwire, like, progress is still going to be made, I guess, is because
so the way sense, yeah, I think litigation then. If you're operating in this space, you should have budgeted for it. Like, it should be built into your expectations, which might go back to why I don't think the federal stuff is going to happen as quickly, because I baked litigation into my expectations. And so it's not going to trip me up because I planned accordingly.
Yeah. And mine is the public health or safety tipping point. And me saying that, the fact that it's overblown is not an understatement of the importance of making sure that these programs are safe and responsible. It's more the fact that has been such a hyper focus of how these programs are structured and set up. I think they have the infrastructure to proactively head a lot of that off, and plans have been put into place where we can address it and address it appropriately. So whereas if that was to happen, I think it would be a positive reaction from states in order to address it, identify the problem, and fix it. So that's why I think that one may be overblown. So
that's an important distinction, though, that I hope our listeners appreciate, which is you're not saying that the risk isn't there. You're not like that. It's not a reality. Instead, it's your confidence is in the structures that were established anticipating that.
Oh, 100%. The risk
Yeah.
is there every day that you have a fully functioning program. But yeah, the infrastructure, like that should have been, I guarantee you, it's been front of mind. All right. These are why we're putting these policies in place to address these and make
Exactly.
sure that they don't happen. And these are the plans and systems that we put in place to address it if and when, God hope it doesn't happen. It does. Yes. Thank you for that clarity. I tried to frame it that way, but I want
You
to make
did.
sure
No,
people are like,
I
oh my
was
God, this
I
ex
was
regulator is
reinforcing
like,
it
who cares if
because I
somebody
was
gets
thinking to
sick?
myself, like, I don't want to, that I was thinking, like, I don't want to portray it like, I see the risk of interpretation there being like, Erik doesn't think there's going to be a public health or like there's a public health risk at all. Like, what a cavalier attitude. But no, I think quite the opposite. I think regulators train for it. That's why we have things like track and trace. That's why we have things like every licensee's got to have a recall protocol. Like the system was built anticipating that potential. And it's also been stress tested to the point where you're seeing recalls across different states with
Exactly.
some enhanced frequency now. But you're also
Exactly.
seeing some of the manufacturing processes get scrutinized even more, et cetera. So, yeah, no, I think you made that distinction. I just wanted to drive it home because I think I would share it, by the way. I think you're right that my confidence is in those regulators that are in that space, but also the operators who take this stuff seriously too. And, I think they want, the last thing any brand wants is to be associated with a public health issue. So
Totally.
we're all in this together.
Absolutely. And that's a good point worth making. The vast majority of these operators and licensees in these state programs are trying to do it the right way. So that was episode 13 for us, Shawn. We got through the 5 bets for 2026. We got some good conversation around what potential tripwires could be. And hopefully when we look back and we score ourselves at the end of this year or early in 2027, we did an all right job.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the good enough for government, right? But no, I think the other thing worth highlighting or future tensing here is some of those topics are kind of what we have planned for future episodes too, because we do see them as being relevant topics for this next calendar year. But they're also going to be areas of focus for us and our colleagues in government or our former friends in government. But the goal is to take some of these issues as they happen and talk to experts in those respective fields, right? Like, we talk about receivership or public health and testing and all of that stuff if it's something we're looking at and exploring and worried about, there's a good chance it's obviously going to be relevant to our listeners as well. And we want to bring those experts to talk to you and share their expertise. We want to pose our questions to them. And but in a way that our bets are kind of a bit of a tease for future programming too.
Yeah. And for the listeners, we have been doing some planning for Q1, Q2, 2026.
Believe it or not, yeah.
We got some invites out, some invites accepted. So we have a great group of guests that we're excited about bringing on. We're excited about having the conversation. We're excited about sharing the work that they're doing and experiences with you guys and girls. So excited to keep this podcast, the hybrid, rolling, man.
Yeah. And with that in mind too, if you are listening and have an idea, send it along, right? Like we're on social media. We push this stuff out. We've got our own personal networks, but if you've been listening long enough to be able to get to this portion of our episode, we definitely want to hear from you. Also wake up, in case you dozed off, but no, the truth is, we don't know everything. I think we would admit that openly. And we're also curious to learn more. And we want to learn from our listeners about what you want to hear about. So engage us on social media. We're on Instagram, we're on LinkedIn, or at least both of us are individually, our own personal social medias. But by all means, reach out and make a suggestion if you want someone you think we should talk to or something you think we should cover. We're definitely open. That said, we have done some planning. We have some exciting episodes that are going to be coming up this year. And, we want to get into a cadence where we're bringing relevant material to you, but also with some regularity too. So,
amen. All right.
Anything else you want to plug? Any shout outs you want to give, or are we just going to land this bird?
I think we can close the book on episode 13, our 2026 look ahead, and hopefully we'll record again in a few days or a week or so.
Soon enough. Yeah. All right, everybody. Well, thanks again for listening to The Hybrid. And as always, like, subscribe, and do the things that people do for podcasts. But Erik, good to see you. Wishing you and your family the best for 2026. And we will revisit these bets and maybe exchange some Venmos or something as far as value. But all right, we'll see you soon and keep listening. Thanks, folks.
See you.
The hybrid. The hybrid.